Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
There is a woman who hasn't said what she really thinks in 23 years. You might know her. You might be her. She smiles at the dinner table when she'd rather cry. She volunteers for one more committee, one more favor, one more Sunday when all she wanted was a quiet afternoon with a book and a cup of tea that didn't go cold. She has become so fluent in other people's comfort that she can barely remember the sound of her own truth anymore. And here's the part that no one talks about. The part that sits like a stone in the chest at 2 a.m. She is exhausted, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The bone, deep, soul-worn exhaustion that comes from years of shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never quite designed for you. Does any of this feel familiar? Because I want to sit with you here for a while. Not to hand you a list of strategies, not to give you a 5-step formula, but to have an honest conversation, the kind you maybe haven't had with anyone in a long time. The kind where we look at something real. Here it is, the unspoken truth most of us carry. We have spent the better part of our lives trying desperately to be liked, to be approved of, to be enough in someone else's eyes. And somewhere along the way, we confused being liked with being loved. We confused people's approval with our own worth. And we built our entire sense of safety around the very fragile, very unpredictable reaction of other people. That is a house built on sand, my friend. And somewhere deep inside you, you've always known it. The philosopher Alfred Adler, whose ideas inspired a powerful book called The Courage to be Disliked, said something that stopped me cold the first time I encountered it. He said that almost all of our suffering, the anxiety, the loneliness, the quiet desperation, it comes down to one thing: interpersonal relationships. Not the relationships themselves, but our fear within them, our desperate need to control how other people see us. Think about that for a moment. Really let it land. How much of your mental real estate is occupied by what she might think? Or what he probably meant by that comment? Or whether the silence after you spoke your mind meant you'd said something wrong? How many conversations do you rehearse before you have them? How many apologies do you offer before you've even done anything that requires one? We carry these quiet whispers inside us, don't we? What if they don't approve? What if they pull away? What if I say the wrong thing and something breaks that can never be repaired? And so we become curators of other people's comfort. We smooth our edges. We swallow our opinions with our morning coffee. We say, no, it's fine, when nothing about it is fine. Now here's where I want to be gentle with you and honest with you, because you deserve both. This isn't weakness. Please hear that. What you've been doing all these years, the accommodating, the smoothing, the careful navigation of other people's moods and expectations, that was often survival. For many women of our generation, keeping the peace wasn't a personality flaw, it was a strategy. It was what we were taught, directly or indirectly, explicitly or through 1,000 tiny signals, that our value was measured in our usefulness to others, in our agreeableness, in our capacity to make everyone in the room feel comfortable, even at the cost of our own comfort. You were not wrong to learn that lesson, but you may have outgrown it. And here's what no one prepared us for, that unlearning it would require something that feels almost reckless. Something that goes against everything we were taught about being good, being kind, being a woman who is easy to love. It requires the courage to be disliked, not the desire to be disliked. That's a different thing entirely, and it belongs to adolescence or resentment, not wisdom. This is something quieter and braver than that. It's the willingness to live in such a way that some people, maybe people you love, maybe people whose opinion has mattered to you for decades, simply won't approve of the real you. And to do it anyway. I know what you might be feeling right now. Maybe something tightened in your chest at that word, disliked. Maybe a small voice said, but I don't want to lose people. Maybe there's a face that came to mind immediately, A mother, a sister, a husband, a daughter. Someone whose approval has been both your sanctuary and your invisible cage. That feeling. That's not weakness either. That's the weight we carry. That's the cost of caring deeply, which is actually one of the most beautiful things about you. But I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it rather than answer it quickly. What is the cost of the alternative? What does it cost you? Your body, your spirit, your sense of self, to keep performing the version of yourself that everyone else has decided they prefer. To keep editing out the parts of you that are inconvenient, complicated, or simply true. What has that been costing you for 20, 30, 40 years? That is where we begin. Let me tell you about a pattern I've seen over and over again in the research, in the therapy room, and honestly, in the mirror. A woman does something generous. Gives her time, her energy, her silence, her yes when every part of her meant no. And for a moment, just a moment, there's relief. The other person is happy. The room stays peaceful. No one is disappointed. No one leaves. And her nervous system exhales. But that exhale, it's not peace. It's release from threat. Those are two entirely different things. And understanding the difference might be one of the most important psychological realizations you ever have. True peace is expansive. It feels like space. It feels like being able to breathe all the way down. What we often call peace, what people-pleasing delivers, is more like the quiet after you've been holding your breath for so long that you've simply run out of air. It's relief, it's temporary, and it requires the next performance to maintain itself. This is the cycle, and most of us have been in it so long we've stopped noticing it as a cycle at all. It just feels like life. Here's what's actually happening underneath, at a psychological level, because you deserve more than platitudes. You deserve the real explanation. When we are young, very young, sometimes before we have language for it, we learn what makes us safe. We learn what makes the people we depend on stay close, stay calm, stay available. And for a great many women, especially those of us raised in households where emotions were complicated, or where love felt conditional, or where keeping a certain kind of peace was genuinely necessary, we learned that our authentic self was sometimes too much. Too loud, too needy, too inconvenient. So we began to edit. Psychologists call this the development of a false self. Not false in the sense of dishonest, but false in the sense of constructed. A version of us built for external consumption. A self shaped by what was rewarded and what was punished in the early rooms we grew up in. And here is the heartbreaking part. The part that makes me want to reach through and hold your hand. That little girl wasn't wrong to do it. She was brilliant, actually. She adapted. She read the room. She made herself safer. But she is a grown woman now, and she is still editing herself for rooms she left decades ago. Adler called this the desire for recognition. And he was not kind about it, which I find oddly comforting. He said that living for other people's approval is a kind of self-abandonment dressed up as virtue. We call it being considerate, being selfless, being a good woman. But underneath it, if we're honest, and I think we're ready to be honest, there is often something that looks a lot like fear. Fear that without the performance, we are not enough. Fear that if people saw us fully, the impatience, the opinions, the desires, the grief, the parts we don't put in the Christmas card, they would quietly, slowly withdraw. Fear of being truly known and then rejected, because that kind of rejection cuts differently than the surface kind. When someone rejects the performance, that's manageable. When someone rejects you, the real you, the one you finally allowed yourself to show, that feels unsurvivable. So we never find out. We keep the real self behind glass, safe, unseen, and lonely in a way that no amount of company can touch. I want to name something that I think lives in the particular experience of women in our age group. And I want to name it without flinching. We grew up in an era that had very specific and very narrow ideas about what a woman was supposed to be. Accommodating, warm, endlessly available, not too opinionated, not too ambitious, not too much of anything that might make the people around her uncomfortable. These weren't just cultural suggestions. They were enforced. Socially, relationally, sometimes within our own families. The woman who spoke plainly was difficult. The woman who set limits was cold. The woman who chose herself, even occasionally, was selfish. And so we internalized a belief so deep that most of us have never even examined it, that our lovability is conditional on our compliance. Read that again slowly. Our lovability is conditional on our compliance. Is it any wonder we are exhausted? We haven't just been doing tasks for other people. We have been perpetually auditioning, performing our worthiness in an endless show that never quite closes, because the approval we're seeking was never consistently given, and so it became the thing we are always chasing. Now, I don't want to leave you in that realization without handing you something to hold on to. Because naming the wound is the beginning, not the destination. Here is what Adler understood, and what I believe with everything I have, about the way forward. The goal is not to stop caring about people. Please don't hear that. The goal is not to become someone who moves through the world indifferent to how their actions land, immune to connection, armored against intimacy. That is not freedom. That is just a different kind of prison. The goal is to make a profound, quiet, radical distinction between two things that we have spent our lives treating as the same thing: being loved and being approved of. Approval is about your behavior. It's about whether you are currently being convenient, agreeable, and non-threatening to someone else's sense of order. It can be withdrawn the moment you stop performing. It is inherently unstable because it lives entirely in someone else's hands. You cannot earn enough of it. You cannot store it. And chasing it, truly chasing it as the primary source of your sense of worth, is one of the loneliest things a human being can do. Love, real love, the kind worth having, does not require your edges to be sanded off. It does not require you to disappear inside someone else's comfort. It asks you to show up, not to perform. It can hold your truth, your complexity, your inconvenient needs, your beautifully specific self. And here is what I want you to really hear, perhaps for the first time. The people capable of that kind of love cannot find you while you're still hiding behind the performance. Your authenticity is not a liability. It is an invitation. But it requires something terrifying. It requires you to risk the disapproval of people who may only have space for the version of you they've grown comfortable with. And that, right there, is where the courage comes in. Not the dramatic chest-forward kind of courage we associate with grand gestures. The quiet, Tuesday morning kind. The courage that says, I am going to tell the truth today, even though my hands are shaking. The courage to let someone be disappointed in you and not immediately rush to fix it. The courage to sit in the discomfort of another person's reaction without taking it as evidence of your inadequacy. That kind of courage, it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel heroic in the moment. It often just feels like walking through a room with your heart in your throat and your chin just barely up. But it is the bravest thing I know. So here we are. We've named the wound. We've understood where it came from. And now comes the part that most self-help content completely skips over in its rush to hand you a tidy list of action steps. The part where we talk about what it actually feels like to change. Because I want to be honest with you about something. When people talk about setting boundaries or living authentically, they make it sound like a decision you make once, cleanly, like flipping a switch. Like one morning you simply choose to stop seeking approval, and from that point forward you walk through the world unbothered, serene, finally free. That is not how this works. What actually happens is messier and slower, and, in my experience, far more interesting than the tidy version. What actually happens is that you make a small, trembling choice to be more honest. Maybe in a low-stakes conversation. maybe in a moment that catches you off guard, and the other person reacts, and your entire nervous system lights up like a fire alarm. The old voice comes rushing in. See, you upset them. Fix it, apologize, take it back, smooth it over, make it right. And here is where the real work lies. Not in the original choice, but in what you do in the 10 seconds after that fire alarm goes off. I want to give you something practical here. Something you can actually use, not just think about. There is a concept I return to again and again, both in my own life and in conversations with women who are learning, slowly, imperfectly, bravely, to live from the inside out rather than the outside in. I call it the pause before the apology. You know this moment. Someone reacts to your honesty, your limit, your need with silence, or a sigh, or that particular tone of voice that has always meant you've done something wrong. And before your next heartbeat, you are already forming the words that will make it better. Already scanning for the fastest route back to their comfort. The practice, the genuine, life-changing practice, is to pause there, not forever, not in cruelty, just long enough to ask yourself one honest question. Did I actually do something wrong? Or did I simply do something real? Because those are not the same thing. And for women who have spent decades conflating the two, learning to tell them apart is revolutionary work. Disappointing someone is not a moral failure. Inconveniencing someone with your truth is not a transgression. Having a need that asks something of another person is not an imposition. These are simply the textures of honest human relationship. And the fact that they feel like violations, that they trigger guilt and shame and the frantic need to repair, that's not your conscience speaking. That's your conditioning. Let's talk about the people in your life, because this doesn't happen in the abstract. It happens at the kitchen table. It happens on the phone with your adult children. It happens in the quiet after a conversation where you said something true, and now you're lying awake wondering if you said too much. Here's something I think you already sense, but perhaps haven't fully given yourself permission to articulate. Not everyone in your life is going to welcome this version of you. Some people you love, people who love you, have built their relationship with you around the accommodating version. Around the woman who doesn't push back, who absorbs tension, who bends. And when you begin to shift, when you begin to take up the space that was always rightfully yours, some of them will experience it as a loss. Some of them will push back. Some of them will say, in words or in silence, this isn't what I signed up for. And that is painful. I won't pretend otherwise. That particular pain of being misunderstood by someone close, of having your growth feel threatening to someone you love. That's one of the sharper griefs of becoming more yourself. But here is the unspoken truth that I want to offer you as gently as I can. Their discomfort with your authenticity is information about them, not evidence against you. Someone who can only love the edited version of you is not loving you. They are loving the service you provide. And your whole, complicated, opinionated, beautifully human self deserve more than that. You have always deserved more than that. Now, I also want to say something about the people who will rise to meet you, because they exist. And in my experience, when women begin to show up more honestly, when they stop performing and start being extraordinary, sometimes happens. Relationships that were polite become genuine. Conversations that were surface level develop a kind of depth that takes your breath away. People you'd written off as acquaintances turn out to be capable of real intimacy, real recognition, real love. Because authenticity is magnetic in the truest sense. Not performatively magnetic, not the curated authenticity of someone telling their story for effect, but the quiet, specific, unmistakable quality of a person who is actually present, who is actually there, who isn't managing you or managing themselves, but simply showing up as they are and allowing you to do the same. That quality is rare, and people recognize it even when they can't name it. They lean toward it, They feel safer in its presence. They begin, sometimes tentatively, sometimes with great relief, to show up more honestly themselves. Your willingness to be real becomes a kind of permission slip for others. So what does the practice actually look like day to day? Because I don't want to leave you with beautiful ideas that have no footing in the ordinary. It looks like this. It looks like pausing before you say, "I'm fine," and asking yourself if you actually are. And if you're not, deciding whether this is a moment to say so. It looks like noticing the slow burn of resentment, that reliable signal that you have given something you didn't freely choose to give, and treating it not as a character flaw, but as useful information. It looks like letting a silence sit after you've said something honest, instead of rushing in to cushion it or qualify it into harmlessness. It looks like saying, "I need to think about that before I commit," instead of yes, when yes isn't actually true. It looks like tolerating someone's disappointment for long enough to discover that you survived it, that they survived it, that the relationship, if it's a real one, survived it too. These are not grand gestures. They are small, daily, unglamorous acts of self-respect. And they compound, slowly, imperceptibly they compound the way water shapes stone, not dramatically, not overnight, but undeniably. One more thing before we move into our final piece together. And this one I want you to carry carefully, because I think it might be the most important thing I'll say. Becoming someone who can tolerate being disliked does not mean becoming someone who is indifferent to connection. In fact, I'd argue it's the opposite. The woman who has made peace with the possibility of disapproval is more capable of genuine intimacy, not less. Because she is no longer performing. She is no longer managing the distance between who she is and who she thinks she needs to be. She is simply, finally here, and from that place, from that ground of being actually present in your own life, love becomes possible in a way it simply cannot be when you are always watching from behind the glass. You are not too much. You have never been too much. You have simply been in rooms that were too small. I want to begin this last part with something that might surprise you. The courage to be disliked is not, at its heart, about other people. I know. We've spent all this time talking about relationships, about approval, about the way other people's reactions have shaped the architecture of our inner lives. And all of that is real and necessary. But here, at the end, I want to turn the lens inward. All the way inward. Because the deepest truth of this whole conversation is this: the person whose approval you have been seeking most desperately, whose disappointment cuts the deepest, whose silence is most unbearable, whose judgment you lie awake rehearsing answers to, is you. Sit with that for a moment. We project it outward. We assign it to our mothers, our partners, our children, our friends. But so much of the exhausting performance, the endless editing, the quiet whispers of not enough that follow us from room to room, that is a conversation happening inside. A harsh, relentless, decades-long conversation between the self you actually are and the self you decided you were supposed to be. And that is the relationship that most urgently needs your attention. Here is something I've observed, both in research and in life: women who do the work of becoming more authentically themselves, who practice the small, trembling courage of showing up honestly, almost universally report the same unexpected discovery. They thought the work was about other people, about learning to handle disapproval from outside, about building a thicker skin, a stronger boundary, a more resilient sense of self in the face of criticism. And yes, it is that. But what they didn't expect, what blindsides almost everyone who walks this path, is how much of the disapproval they were running from was internal. How much of the performance was for an audience of one? How much of the exhaustion came not from managing other people's reactions, but from managing the constant, grinding self-judgment that said if they saw the real you, they would be right to leave. The work, it turns out, is not primarily about learning to withstand being disliked by others. It is about learning to like yourself. To genuinely, quietly, without performance or condition, be at home in your own company. What does that homecoming look like practically? It begins with grief, actually. And I think it's important to name that because it gets skipped over. When you start to release the version of yourself you've been performing for decades, there is loss, real loss. The identity you built, careful, accommodating, endlessly helpful, that has been you in a very real way. It kept you safe. It earned you love or something that felt like it. It was in its own way a kind of home. Leaving it requires mourning it, not with drama, but with honesty. With the acknowledgement that you did the best you could with what you knew and what you had, and that it served a purpose, and that you are grateful for the ways it protected you, and that you are ready, finally, quietly, without apology, to lay it down. There is a particular tenderness that comes with that grieving, a softening. Women who have spent years being hard on themselves, holding themselves to an impossible standard of selflessness, discover, in the process of releasing that, a capacity for self-compassion they didn't know they possessed, as though the very act of allowing the old self to be released without judgment teaches them how to treat themselves with the same grace they've always extended to everyone else. You deserve the grace you so freely give to others. I want you to let that sentence be more than a nice thought. I want you to let it be an instruction. Let's talk about what the other side of this actually feels like. Not as a fantasy, but as a real, livable, human experience. It doesn't feel like invincibility. It doesn't feel like suddenly not caring what anyone thinks. Those are myths, and chasing them will only make you feel like you're failing at liberation. It feels instead like a particular kind of quiet. A quieting of the constant low-level noise of self-monitoring. The checking and rechecking and recalibrating that runs like background software in the mind of a woman who has learned to make her worth contingent on other people's reactions. That noise doesn't disappear overnight, but it gets quieter, and in the space it leaves behind, something else begins to grow. Your own voice. Not the voice that performs, not the voice that manages. Your actual voice. The one that knows what it thinks before it checks to see if that's allowed. The one that has opinions and desires and grievances and joys that are entirely, specifically, irreducibly yours. The one that has been there all along, speaking in the quiet whispers underneath all the noise, waiting with extraordinary patience for you to finally lean in and listen. That voice is not frightening. I know it can feel that way, like something dangerous has been locked away for good reason, and letting it out will cause damage. But it isn't dangerous. It is just honest, and honesty in the right hands, in your hands, is one of the most loving forces there is. I want to speak now to the part of you that is afraid it's too late. The part that is doing quiet arithmetic on years, adding up the decades of performance and wondering whether there is enough time left to live differently. Whether the people in your life are too set in their expectations to allow for the real you to emerge. Whether you are too formed, too fixed, too far in to change course now. Let me be as clear as I know how to be. It is not too late. Not remotely. Not even slightly. In fact, and this is not consolation,